When I walked into our family's Thanksgiving dinner that year, something felt off. No one looked me in the eye. My cousins went quiet when I entered the room. My aunt, who used to hug me the tightest, just gave me a stiff nod and turned away. At first, I thought maybe I'd missed a conversation. Maybe they were just tired or distracted. But then I heard the whispering. Words like, "too busy for her own sister," and "not even around during the hardest time." That's when I saw my mother's expression, tight-lipped and ashamed, as she slipped me her phone under the table. On the screen was a Facebook post from my younger sister, Heather. It had been shared hundreds of times. In it, she wrote that she had battled her illness completely alone. That her family, especially me, her successful big sister, had abandoned her. That I couldn't be bothered to care. Except I had been there. I paid over $58,000 in medical bills. I drove her to every single appointment. I even took unpaid leave from work just to cook her meals and sit by her side. And yet, in one post, she erased everything. Have you ever sacrificed everything for someone, only to be painted as the villain in their story? If you were in my shoes, would you stay quiet? Or would you tell the truth, no matter the cost? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life revenge stories like this one. My name is Rachel Thompson. I'm 49 years old, and I've spent the last 2 decades working in pharmaceutical research in Boston. I'm not flashy or dramatic. I don't post my life online. I believe in doing the right thing quietly. Growing up, I was always the responsible one, the older sister, the one who got straight A's, held summer jobs, and never caused trouble. Heather was different. She was wild and impulsive. My parents used to say she was sensitive, but what they really meant was that she could cry her way out of anything. She bounced between jobs, had 2 short-lived marriages, and was always the center of family drama. Still, I loved her. I always loved her. When Heather was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease at 45, she called me sobbing. I didn't hesitate. I cleared my calendar, transferred money that same night, and booked a flight to see her. Over the next 18 months, I became her unofficial nurse, driver, meal prepper, and emergency contact. I organized her prescriptions, battled with insurance reps, and even learned how to change IV dressings. The costs added up fast. Insurance barely covered half of her treatments, and the experimental therapies were expensive. I ended up draining a good chunk of my savings, $58,000 in total. I picked up freelance medical consulting gigs on the side just to stay afloat, but I never complained. Because for a while, it felt worth it. Heather and I were closer than we'd ever been. She started calling me her angel. She'd tear up during chemo and say things like, "I don't know what I'd do without you." It felt like we were healing old wounds. She even posted sweet things online, pictures of the 2 of us laughing in hospital rooms, little captions like, "Sister love is the best medicine." Our extended family would comment heart emojis and say how proud they were of us. I thought we were in a good place, so when Thanksgiving rolled around, I was genuinely excited. I baked her favorite pie, picked out a bottle of wine, and even wore the scarf she'd gifted me after remission. But the moment I stepped into my parents' house, I knew something had shifted. My cousin Lisa, who once told me I was her role model, wouldn't meet my eyes. Uncle Brad made an offhand comment about people who make themselves look good while others suffer. I froze. Was this about work? Was someone mad I hadn't answered a group chat? I found my mom in the kitchen and asked what was going on. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. That's when I saw Heather's Facebook post from the week before. A long, emotional piece about how she'd fought for her life with no one to lean on, about how her sister, me, had refused to help, and how she'd learned the hard way that blood doesn't mean loyalty. Hundreds of comments, some from strangers, but many were from our family. "Unbelievable," one relative wrote. "I always knew Rachel was too wrapped up in her job." "She's always been cold," another said. "Heather deserved better." I stood there reading line after line, feeling like the air had been punched out of my lungs. My mom looked pale and muttered, "Maybe she just remembers things differently. She was on heavy meds." I whispered, "But it's a lie." She didn't answer. I had the receipts, the emails, the appointment logs, the drained savings account. I knew what I did for Heather, but somehow my entire family was more comfortable with her version. They needed a victim, and she gave them one, with a perfect villain to blame. Me. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. I left the kitchen and went upstairs to the guest room, pretending I had a headache. The truth? I was trying not to fall apart in front of people who clearly didn't care enough to ask my side of the story. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through Heather's post again. The language she used wasn't just dramatic, it was weaponized. She spent her days chasing promotions while I fought for my life alone. My own sister couldn't even be bothered to hold my hand. I had to drive myself home from chemo more than once, because she was too busy. That was the worst part. I never let her go through it alone, not once. Even the one time I had a work emergency, I arranged for a home nurse to sit with her and texted updates every hour. But Heather didn't mention that. She didn't mention the nights I slept on a hospital chair, the weeks I used my own PTO to be by her side, the way I skipped conferences and promotions to care for her. She rewrote history, and everyone believed it. I heard murmurs downstairs. My aunt's voice. Well, we always knew Rachel was distant, that corporate type. Then my cousin chimed in. She never came to family game nights. I'm not surprised. I'd been erased, replaced with some cartoon villain version of myself. Later that evening, I tried one more time. I sat down with my dad. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Dad," I said calmly, "you know I was there for Heather. You saw me at the hospital. You know what I paid for. Why aren't you saying anything?" He sighed and rubbed his temples. "It's not that we don't believe you," he said quietly, "but confronting Heather, it'll just make things worse. She's been through enough." She's been through enough. And I hadn't? I asked him if he'd like to see the receipts. He shook his head. "Rachel," he said, "sometimes it's better to just let things go. Let things go. Let go of 18 months of sacrifice. Let go of my reputation. Let go of the truth." I walked away from that conversation numb. The next morning, I packed my things early. As I carried my suitcase down the stairs, Heather was sitting on the couch, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. She didn't even look surprised to see me leaving. "Flying back to your little lab already?" she said with a smirk. I paused. "Why did you lie?" She tilted her head. "Lie? About me? About everything I did for you?" She gave a slow, deliberate shrug. "People see what they want to see. Maybe you were helpful, but it didn't feel like it." Then she added, "You don't get to control how I experienced my illness." That sentence nearly made my blood boil. "You don't get to erase people just because you're hurting," I said, voice shaking. Heather looked up from her mug. "Well, you don't get to act like a savior and expect applause." I was stunned. I never asked for praise. I only ever wanted peace and honesty. I left without another word. Back in Boston, I tried to focus on work, but I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My inbox filled with cold messages from family members who'd once adored me. "Really disappointed in you. I thought you were better than this." I guess career success changes people. I even got a letter from my uncle saying that my behavior was deeply upsetting and that Heather is fragile. Why would you publicly humiliate her like that? I hadn't even said a word yet. I hadn't defended myself, and somehow that was the crime. Silence wasn't seen as grace. It was interpreted as guilt. I finally called my grandmother. She was the only one who hadn't turned her back on me. When I finished explaining everything, she sighed. "Oh, honey," she said. "This isn't the first time Heather's done something like this. She's always needed to be the victim in every story." "Why?" I whispered. "Why would she do this to me?" "Because you were the one person she could count on. Grandma said gently. "And people like Heather, they resent that kind of power." That conversation changed something in me. For the first time, I wasn't angry. I was done. For days after Thanksgiving, I did what I'd always done, kept my head down and tried to move forward. I buried myself in lab reports. I jogged longer than usual. I cooked for one and pretended the silence in my apartment didn't echo. But it did. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped for a text from someone, anyone in the family, saying they'd finally figured out the truth. That they'd gone back and looked at the photos, the receipts, the hospital records, but no one did. Instead, I got a message from my cousin Jenna. It said, "Hey, maybe next time just show up for your sister instead of making her illness about you. She's not your charity case." That broke something in me, because I had shown up, quietly, consistently. I'd missed dates, career milestones, vacations. I'd held Heather's hair back while she vomited from chemo, wiped tears from her face, held her hand through bone pain that left her screaming. And now, I was being framed as the narcissist, the cold, self-absorbed sister. It wasn't just heartbreaking, it was enraging. I wasn't angry that Heather was fragile. I was angry that she weaponized that fragility against me, and that the people I grew up trusting, people I had shared birthdays, graduations, and funerals with, were eager to believe the worst about me, because it made for a better story. That Sunday night, I opened the drawer of my home office and pulled out a folder. Inside were the printouts I'd kept, bank statements, appointment calendars, meal prep logs, and even text threads confirming medical decisions. I stared at the numbers. $1,400 for infusion therapy not covered by insurance. $200 for specialty transport after a complication. $580 for meds only available at one out-of-network pharmacy. Page after page, it added up. And then there were photos. Heather smiling weakly as I sat beside her, reading aloud from her favorite book. Pictures of the food I cooked, the notes I left for her nurses, the snapshots of us laughing during the rare good days. I hadn't meant to keep them as proof. I just wanted to remember the journey. But now, they were proof. That night, I posted something on Facebook for the first time in over a year. No names, no accusations, just the truth. For anyone wondering where I was during the last 18 months, here are a few receipts. Financial, emotional, and otherwise. I didn't speak up before because I thought love meant staying silent. But silence has been mistaken for guilt. I don't expect validation. I just won't be erased. Attached were redacted screenshots of payments, a calendar showing every hospital visit, and one photo, just one, of Heather asleep with my hand in hers, the hospital monitors beeping softly behind us. I closed the laptop and went to bed with my stomach in knots. The next morning, it had begun. The real backlash, not against Heather, for lying, against me, for telling the truth. My aunt called me a disgrace. My father emailed to say he was disappointed that I aired private family matters. Even Heather messaged, "Wow, you really needed the spotlight that bad?" That's when I knew. There was no repairing this. Not without surrendering my truth, my dignity, and the small piece of myself I still had left. I wrote back a single line. "You made your version public. I made mine honest." That was the last time I spoke to Heather. The next week, I left the Thompson family Facebook group, then the group chat, then the annual newsletter email chain. Not in anger, just done. It was the moment I realized, sometimes the biggest betrayal isn't the lie. It's how quickly the people who claim to love you will believe it. After the fallout, I stopped waiting for apologies. I deleted the Facebook app from my phone. I archived the family photos in a folder I didn't open again, and then I started building a life that didn't revolve around being someone's emotional crutch. At first, it felt unnatural, like I was betraying something. I wasn't used to choosing myself. I was used to managing chaos, solving problems, keeping peace. I was the fixer, the dependable one. But that version of me had been turned into a villain, so I started over. Quietly, I dove into my research projects at work with more focus than I'd had in years. My lab published 2 papers that got national attention. I was invited to speak at a pharmaceutical conference in San Diego, and for the first time, I said yes, without checking in with anyone else's needs first. I reconnected with my college roommate who had moved back to the East Coast. We started a monthly dinner tradition. No family talk, no drama. Just wine, comfort food, and real conversation. I adopted a rescue dog, a bouncy golden retriever mix named Olive. She became my shadow, always ready with a tail wag and a reminder that love doesn't have to be complicated. And I went to therapy, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to understand why I'd tolerated so much for so long. My therapist, Maya, helped me unearth a truth I hadn't wanted to admit. I'd been trained to earn love by being useful, to equate sacrifice with worth. And Heather had taken advantage of that, again and again. It didn't make her evil, it just made her unsafe, and I was allowed to protect myself. One afternoon, about 8 months after Thanksgiving, I got a text from Heather. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" My stomach flipped. I didn't reply. Not right away. I took a day, then another. I thought about what I'd say if I answered. I wrote out a dozen drafts, some angry, some cold. One was just the word "why" followed by a blinking cursor. In the end, I sent this. "I'm not ready for that. I'm still healing from what happened. I hope you're well." It wasn't a wall, but it was a boundary. A few weeks later, I got another message. This one longer. It was Heather's version of an apology, or at least what she could manage. She wrote, "I was hurting, and I needed someone to blame. You've always been perfect. I couldn't take it. I'm sorry." She ended with, "You're still my sister. I hope that means something." It did, just not what it used to. I didn't respond, not because I hated her, but because I'd finally stopped bleeding for someone who never noticed the wounds. I kept moving forward. The following spring, my grandmother passed away. She'd been the only one who stood by me through everything. At the service, most of the family sat together. I arrived alone and sat near the back. Afterward, as people milled around sharing memories, a few relatives approached me, quietly, hesitantly. One cousin whispered, "I saw your post. I believe you." Another said, "I think Heather exaggerated some things. I'm sorry." But I didn't need their validation anymore. Not really. I smiled politely, thanked them, and left early. Because the version of me that needed their approval, the girl desperate to prove she was good, was gone. I had become someone else. Someone stronger. A few months later, Heather reached out again, this time in crisis. She'd had a relapse. The illness was back, and her new insurance didn't cover certain treatments. She asked if I could help, financially. I sat with the message for a long time. Then I replied, "I'm sorry you're going through this again. I hope you get the care you need. I'm happy to be here emotionally, but I won't be contributing financially. I hope you understand." She didn't reply. And that silence? It didn't hurt. It felt like freedom. About 3 weeks after I sent my final message, I got a call from my mother. We hadn't spoken since the Thanksgiving disaster, and for a moment I thought she might be reaching out to apologize, to finally say, "We were wrong. We should have stood by you." But I should have known better. Her voice was brittle, controlled. "Your sister's in trouble again, Rachel. This time it's serious. The doctors say she needs another round of treatments, and she's terrified." I sat in silence. Then came the punchline. "We were hoping you could step in. Help. Like before." Like before. Like the 18 months of driving, cooking, caregiving, and paying tens of thousands of dollars never happened. Like the Facebook post never existed. Like the smearing of my name and the severing of my ties to half the family tree had simply evaporated. I asked gently, "Do you think I owe her that?" There was a long pause. Then, "She's your sister." Ah, the oldest weapon in the family arsenal. Blood. That word used to have so much weight for me. But now, it felt like a leash. I drew a slow breath. I'm sorry she's going through this again. Truly. But I won't be contributing financially. Not this time. My mother's voice turned sharp. You have the money, Rachel. You're not even married. No kids. What are you holding it for? I felt the old guilt rise like bile, but this time, I didn't swallow it. I'm holding it for my peace, I said simply. And because I've learned that when I give until it hurts, no one notices until I stop. She scoffed. So that's it? You're just going to let her suffer? I bit back a dozen retorts. Heather had let me suffer, publicly and privately. And when I showed receipts, I was shamed for embarrassing the family. Not once had my mother or father defended me. Not once had they asked if I was okay. I answered calmly, I'm choosing not to enable a cycle that broke me. Then I ended the call and cried, not because I felt guilty, but because I finally understood what real boundaries cost. They don't always get applause. Sometimes they get silence, disapproval, even exile, but they give you back your life. The days that followed were quiet. No more phone calls, no more guilt trips, no more smears. I suspected Heather had realized she'd burned the last bridge. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like someone's safety net. I felt like a person with edges, clear lines between what I was willing to give and what I would never give again. Weeks passed. Then, one evening while scrolling online, I stumbled across something that stopped me cold. Heather had posted again. Another lengthy caption, a photo of her in a hospital gown. The tone was familiar, melancholy, poetic, deeply curated for maximum sympathy. But this time, there was no mention of abandonment, no shadowy older sister used as a plot device. In fact, she'd written, I've made mistakes. I've pushed people away who tried to help. Illness doesn't excuse everything. I'm learning, slowly. I stared at those words longer than I'd like to admit. It wasn't an apology, not really, not to me at least. But it was something. I didn't react, didn't comment, didn't message. I just closed the app, got up, and took Olive for a long walk by the river. The air was crisp, the water calm. I realized then that I didn't need closure from Heather. I didn't need vindication from my family. What I needed, what I had, was distance, quiet, and the ability to choose how I spent my energy. A few days later, I received a card in the mail, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from my grandmother's old friend, Eileen. Inside, a short note. Your grandma used to say, the truth will either set you free or set you apart, sometimes both. I'm proud of you. She would be too. That was the only validation I needed. 3 years have passed since that Thanksgiving. I no longer attend family holidays. No awkward dinners, no tight smiles across tables thick with tension, no waiting for people to remember what's true. Instead, I spend the holidays with my chosen family, people who've seen me cry over burnt lasagna and still come back with wine the next day. People who know my story, not because I shouted it, but because they asked and actually listened. I'm still in Boston, still working in pharmaceutical research. But my life feels different now, lighter. My days are quieter, but more intentional. I've traded urgency for calm, obligation for choice. On Sundays, I take Olive to the park. We sit by the pond, and I read. Sometimes I think about Heather, about my parents, about the version of me they refused to see because it didn't fit the narrative they liked better, but mostly I think about how far I've come. There's power in walking away, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in peace. Sometimes healing doesn't look like reconciliation. It looks like solitude. It sounds like silence that no longer hurts. People ask me if I ever forgave Heather. The truth? I forgave her the moment I realized I didn't need her apology to be whole. Some stories don't end with hugs or tearful reunions. Some end with a woman standing tall saying, "That was enough." So if you're listening, if you've ever been erased, silenced, blamed, or abandoned by the very people you showed up for, let me tell you this. You are not selfish for walking away. You are not cruel for telling the truth. And you are not wrong for protecting your peace. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is choose yourself. What did you think of this story? If you were in Rachel's shoes, how would you have handled it? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you support Rachel, vote number 2. If you think she should have stayed quiet, vote number 7. Don't forget to subscribe to Revenge with Chris so you never miss a powerful new karma story every single day.